I should have impressed. Anyways, hello everybody. Welcome back to Redditor Radio, episode 554, coming to you on Wednesday, August 28th. It wouldn't be the start of a new season without a technical mishap, but here we are, live on YouTube, joining you to preview USC and LSU, the Trojans and the Tigers, locking horns, 4:30 p.m. on ABC. I'm your host, Michael C. Jones, my co-host in the Rant Line studio in Los Angeles, Alicia Derto.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, we are back. Our little virtual studio here on the internet has like new features where there's like new scenes and stuff, which is awesome because we've been sort of wanting this forever. And then I'm the one who pressed like going through the scenes, making sure that they're correct while the pre-show video is going, and just like overriding that the video's playing. Genius work here.
Good job.
Yeah. But here we are. We are here to preview SC and LSU. Last week is in like 3 days ago, we were in Van Nuys at Woodley Park and had our pre-season tailgate.
And it was awesome.
Yeah,
it actually exceeded all of my expectations. It truly was a tailgate. It really scratched that tailgate itch that we had a great group of people, great conversations. The weather couldn't have asked for anything better. Jessie stole a sandwich and had the time of her life. We all hung out under a nice big tree and just talked USC the whole time. So yeah, it was great. I mean, we had technical issues then too because our grill didn't work and we had to panic call to get a fresh one. Kenny saved a day. Yeah. Saved one. Robin Murdy in the chat asked how Jessie is. Jessie is great. Jessie has parked herself literally within foot's reach of me. Oop! I moved her. Out of the view of the camera. I think I just pushed her into the view of the camera. There she is. Yeah, Miss Jessie chose her
barely
her little sleeping spot. Stuck her face right in between the two posts of the desk in what looked like a very uncomfortable position, but I've saved her from that, and now she's doing her little nap.
Yeah, just getting ready
for the camera
for the football season.
Yes,
you got to get all your preseason naps in before everything starts because it's that fresh season smell, right? That fresh season taste, just like mint. Like, Mint Mobile. Because, Alicia, I don't know if you've noticed, but Mint Mobile is running an incredible deal right now where you can get 3 months of a phone bill for just $15 a month over at Mint Mobile. And it's super easy to move over there. Turns out it's like incredibly easy. The longest part of the process was sort of being on hold with the other guys to cancel them. So just go to their website, mintmobile.com/Troy, where you'll see that right now all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. All plans come with high-speed data, unlimited talk and text, delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with Mint Mobile. You can bring it along, bring all your contacts, your apps, your everything. And to get this new customer bonus, go to mintmobile.com/Troy. Get the new customer bonus with 3-month premium wireless plan for $15 a month. Go to mintmobile.com/Troy. That's mintmobile.com/Troy. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/Troy. $45 is upfront payment and is required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on the first 3-month plan only. Slower speeds above 40 gigs on the unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. That's mintmobile.com/Troy. That's a mouthful.
It is, but it's a good mouthful.
Yeah, because it's mint.
Yes.
Where are you on mint, spearmint, peppermint? Do you have a preference?
Big fan of spearmint.
Okay.
I love like a peppermint tea, but peppermint flavored things sometimes are too intense for me. So I try to, certainly gums, I try to stay away from peppermint and always go spearmint or wintermint or, one of those, I think, softer mints.
When I was a kid, I was big about the cinnamons.
Cinnamon's great. Yeah, I love cinnamon.
A little big red.
Big Red.
There was one that
Yes.
had like a crazy name. I can't remember what it was. I don't know. But
I don't know.
Alicia, there's a lot to get into. So let's just get into it. Let's talk about the 2024 USC Trojans going up against LSU on Sunday night. Sunday, 4:30 p.m. on ABC. It's Reese Davis and Kirk Herbstreit on the call. The Trojans have new captains for the game, but there's a new thing. I like, first of all, I want my annual preface. I do not care who the captains are. I think caring about who the captains are is weird. We're not in the locker room. Who are we to say who's a good leader and who's, you know what I mean? But I think it's interesting and worth noting that the captains the Trojans will be trotting out there this year will be picked on a weekly basis. So the captains going into week 1 against LSU, Jonah Monheim, Miller Moss, Easton Mascaredes Arnold, Akili Arnold, and Kyron Hudson. Your thoughts?
That's a good group. I think it's the obvious couple are Miller Moss and Jonah Monheim, and then the other three I would have had a little bit of had to have a think about who might get that designation. I would have suspected EMA, Easton Mascaredes Arnold, and or Akili Arnold, just based on the way that they've been talked about this offseason as figures on that defense. Kyron Hudson is the surprise here. Not that I was like, he could never be a captain, just like he wouldn't have been on my radar to be a captain. But I know that you absolutely love that pick because he's one of your sleeper picks to be a big part of USC's offense this year. It's nice to see a veteran wide receiver in a group full of younger guys be acknowledged as a presence that's worthy of being voted a captain. I think that speaks really highly to him and also feels like a good sign. If I'm going to be reading way too much into this, feels like a good sign for USC's wide receiver group that they have a guy like that in there who's setting a good example.
Yeah, I think the thing I like about the weekly thing is that it prevents the awkwardness. Like Max Brown being the captain for SC in 2016 made sense at the beginning of the season. As the season went on, it was a little awkward, right? Like, also there's, and it's not just a quarterback situation, but that could happen to anybody. Any of these 5 guys might end up, losing a job, getting hurt, whatever it is. Like, things change.
I mean, last year, Shane Lee and Mason Cobb were captains, and they were in and out of that lineup. They weren't always available for USC. They weren't always the first choice for USC. It does get really awkward. And I totally understand. And I think, I don't think doing weekly captains could possibly be a bad thing. Like it could be a thing that doesn't necessarily have an impact in the end, but I don't see any potential for a negative backlash on that one.
Yeah. I'm curious how it changes week to week. Like, is it going to be a thing where like 4 of the 5 guys are the same every week?
Yeah.
And like one spot changes out or something? I don't know. I think that we're going to have to sort of watch that. It would be hilarious if it was the same 5 literally all season long.
Yeah. I mean, it would be, I don't know. I think that might ultimately be a good thing, but this does, as you brought up, prevents the Max Brown situation, considering we've looked at this offseason quarterback battle as a potential Max Brown, Sam Darnold scenario with Miller Moss and Jaden Maiava. So yeah,
we'll see how it goes. Yeah. So those will be the 5 trotting out for the coin toss against LSU. Let's talk about the Tigers. Coached by Brian Kelly in his 3rd year. They're 13th in the AP preseason poll, 7th in the FEI rankings for the preseason overall. The number 1 offense and the number 65 defense. Last year, I have to say, and not just last year, but like in every sense of everything, I think LSU is like looking at this team is like literally looking in the mirror and looking back at SC.
Yeah.
It's uncanny. Last year, the Tigers were 2nd in offense in FEI, 101st in defense. They fired the defensive coordinator. They're replacing a new defensive coordinator. They have to replace a new quarterback who won a Heisman Trophy. They're replacing the quarterback with a quarterback who started in the bowl game and won it. against the team who wears white and red and played very well in the bowl game. Which team am I talking about? You don't know because it's the same team. LSU and SC are literally the same. It's the Superman, the Spider-Man, whatever,
each other meme, yeah.
whatever person pointing back at each other.
Honestly,
it's the same thing.
If USC's defense wasn't so horrifically bad, like to a historical degree, we probably would have been talking more about LSU's defense and how they were basically the same thing as Jaden Daniels won the Heisman in the same manner that Caleb Williams had to go win the Heisman, which is overcome a bad defense and just score on everybody. So the good thing for LSU is that USC's defense was so much more embarrassing and so much more costly to USC's aspirations that they weren't front and center in terms of the, whoa, how could this defense be that bad, conversation.
Yeah, let's talk about the Tigers' defense to start everything off, because sort of I feel like this is the part of LSU that didn't get talked about as much last year because Jaden Daniels was so good from the national perspective. He wins the Heisman Trophy. Obviously, you could talk about that, but the defense was the Achilles heel, just like SC's defense was. They have a lot of shoes to fill, not just on offense, but on defense. 6 NFL draft picks overall, but a lot of those guys on the defensive line, 3 defensive linemen that the Tigers have to replace that were drafted: Mason Smith, Jordan Jefferson, Mekhi Wingo. And this is the defensive front that was 91st in the country last year in yards per carry allowed. You could run against LSU. They allowed 4.53 yards per carry. They did hold Texas A&M to just 2.34, but Ole Miss ran for 317 rushing yards against LSU, and Ole Miss was 9th in the SEC in rushing. So it's not like Ole Miss is, 95 Nebraska going up against LSU and running for 317 yards. All told, in terms of like sacks, LSU was 44th, 2.39 sacks per game. One of the things that you wanted to get into was talking about the new defensive coordinator, which is Blake Baker. He comes over from Missouri. He was previously the defensive coordinator for Missouri and Miami, but this like literally every part of LSU's defense that Blake Baker needs to lead is one that doesn't rank highly among the SEC rankings. CBS put out SEC rankings, and LSU's front is 11th of 16 in the SEC. The secondary is 13 of 16 in the SEC. So we love to talk about how SEC defenses are a completely different thing. How will SC compete against the Big Ten is a talking point going into the season. How will SC compete against the big fronts of an SEC team? But I think that is missing the point here, in that LSU is not Alabama in terms
Georgia.
of or Georgia in terms of where their defense is right now.
Yeah, and this is what makes it difficult, because we're looking at this defense in a lot of the same ways that we're looking at USC's defense, which is, if you want to take an optimistic spin, you can certainly do that by looking at bringing in a new defensive coordinator in Blake Baker, who gets to build a defense around a talent like Harold Perkins and can get more out of the same talented players that were there before, that were just being misused by the previous defensive coordinator. And all they need is just the right scheme and the right motivation and all this kind of stuff, and they're going to put it together. You can also look at it from the pessimistic point of view, which is, this is a defense that, by comparison to USC, did not have a massive transfer portal turnaround in terms of adding a bunch of new players to sort of flip the defense around that way. Adding a defensive coordinator who, while he had a very solid stint with Missouri, didn't do a particularly great job at Miami. Sort of has some mixed results in terms of, is he a sure thing? Which you can look at from USC's perspective with Danton Lynn. It's like, is he a sure thing? You don't know. How quickly can he get this defense flipped? How
Right.
quickly can he get them going when they're about to face a team that has, if nothing else, a coach leading the way as a head coach who has proven year after year after year that he can coach up an offense. Whether you're looking at a Lincoln Riley offense or a Brian Kelly offense, both of them are very good at putting together their offenses. Both of them are quite good at retooling after losing a quarterback. I would say Lincoln Riley's probably better at that than Brian Kelly, but Brian Kelly is no slouch in that regard. So it's a really difficult one to evaluate from the LSU perspective because I think we are naturally motivated to think positively about USC's turnaround, but then I look at everything that's going on with LSU and I'm like, oh well, these are the holes in their lineup and all that kind of stuff, and it's like, well, I could be an LSU podcaster doing the same thing to USC and feeling that it's okay for me to be optimistic about my team but pessimistic about the opposing team. So
Yeah.
it's tough. It is very tough. I think just to boil it all down, it's tough to get a handle on this defense and how equipped they are to stop a Lincoln Riley offense, because that's the other thing is like very few teams have been equipped to stop a Lincoln Riley offense.
Yeah, they gave up a ton of points last year. They are led by Harold Perkins, who you mentioned at linebacker, 13 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks. He was second team All SEC last year, and then probably the best name in all of college football, defensive back, safety, Major Burns. LSU's leading tackler at safety with 93 tackles. Gigantic red flag to have your leading tackler be a safety.
Yeah.
Something SC has known quite well over the recent years, absolutely. But when you look at this SC offense going up against LSU, Miller Moss's first game in the regular season, right? He started in the Holiday Bowl. What are you expecting? He was named the starter last week. What are you expecting for him compared to where we saw him last?
I think the big thing that Miller Moss needs to do is bring the same level of calm and composure that he seemed to have in the Holiday Bowl, and that I think he was commended for coming up through high school and as a recruit, being able to keep his cool and deliver the ball, make good decisions, all of that. My worry for Miller Moss is this is a huge game, a huge prove it game on the road. I mean, not on the road, but in a neutral site, still away with national eyes on them, a Sunday night game. If ever there was a game that a first time starter, or I guess second time starter, first time season starter to come in and be a little bit over egged, a little bit over enthusiastic, this would be it.
Yeah.
And this is maybe the best argument for, if all things were equal, and it doesn't seem to be that they were completely equal, but if all things were equal, this would be the argument to start Miller Moss over Jaden Maiava, just because he is, older and hopefully wiser, and he's
Maiava's got more.
He's got more game experience. Yes, for sure, but not. I mean, at UNLV, not to the degree that this game will be.
Sure.
As Ram Murdy in the chat says, Miller Moss needs to be a good game manager. He needs to be a facilitator. He needs to keep his calm. The way I imagine it is, and this might be setting the bar a little bit too high, because you will know what I mean, Michael, specifically when I say this. I would like to see Miller Moss be Cody Kessler, ASU, 2015.
Yeah.
2015 ASU Cody Kessler, which I think is the perfect example of the game manager quarterback making every decision correctly and with the speed that it needs to be made.
As far as I'm concerned, that was Cody Kessler's last game.
Yeah, we can just wipe the rest of it off of the record.
The Washington game was the game after, and I don't know what happened in that game.
Yeah. But the reason I say that specifically is because LSU does have Harold Perkins, and he will be difficult to deal with from USC's protection standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
LSU does have, while they are dealing with a lot of turnover on the defensive line, they do have talent on the defensive line. They've recruited that position, well over the years. And USC's offensive line is one of the bigger question marks on the team. Miller Moss needs to be prepared for pressure to come, and that Blake Baker too is a guy who loves to bring pressure, who loves to get after a quarterback, who isn't afraid to be aggressive. And from USC's perspective, Miller Moss needs to be ready to see that aggression and to neutralize it by just making the simple decisions. The a non USC, well, a USC example, but an example that I always point to of the game where I just remember like pulling my hair out because watching this opposing quarterback neutralize every blitz that USC would send. Gardner Minshew in the Coliseum, Washington State. USC was sending every blitz under the sun, and he would just see the vacated space and pop a pass over there. See the vacated space and pop a pass. You couldn't get to him because he was just so quickly making those decisions. That's what I need to see. He needs to be able to be making quick, no hero ball from Miller Moss. Yeah. No, I'm the guy from Miller Moss. Just facilitate. And I think USC will be able to do some damage to this LSU defense that is in a rebuild mode.
Yeah, I think the other thing that would absolutely help out is the running game, right? Like we talk about LSU not being an elite SEC defense. Obviously, they have big bodies up front, and SC is going to have to manage that. But I don't think that this is a drastically different, defensive front than what SC has faced in terms of Utah. SC has had to face Utah and Notre Dame. And Oregon the last few years, right? Like, I don't think that LSU is drastically different just because they've got an SEC patch on their jersey. Especially when you look at what SC has been able to do on the ground against Utah the last 2 years, with the exception of the conference championship game. SC has been able to run.
Which was a unique situation, by the way, because the conference championship game, they knew that Caleb Williams could not move.
Yeah.
And they were able to pin their ears back. It was sort of a different situation.
SC averaged 6.3 yards per carry against Utah last year before,
because I choose not to run.
But before that happened, SC only had 23 carries in that game against Utah. But I think the thing is, SC was so inconsistent at running the football because you can point to the Utah game, especially early on in the first half, having success running the football, right? And then you look at the UCLA game. SC had 3 rushing yards. So which offense is SC gonna come to Vegas with? Breaking in a new offensive line with 2 or 3 new starters, depending on how the starters get picked out. The depth chart will be officially announced Thursday, which is a day after we're recording this on Wednesday. So we can't necessarily speak to that, but 2 to 3 new starters on the offensive line, you got to replace those guys, and going up against LSU is not going to be fun. But like I said, I don't think that this is drastically different than the teams that SC has played, like Utah, Notre Dame, etc. Let's talk about the LSU offense, led by Garrett Nussmeier. 1 career start to his name. It was in the ReliaQuest Bowl, aka the Outback Bowl. Can we just call it the Outback Bowl? I'm someone who hates bowl games being talked about, being named whatever their sponsors are. And I understand the irony here because I want to call it the Outback Bowl, which is a sponsored name. I get it. I know. But Staples Center was a sponsored name. And we all call it the Staples Center because that was correct. That was right. The Outback Bowl should be called the Outback Bowl, damn it. Not the ReliaQuest Bowl, whatever the hell ReliaQuest is. Anyways, 31-45 in the ReliaQuest Bowl, 395 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. It was the only game that Nussmeier has started, not only last year, but his entire career. He did play Arkansas a couple years ago, where he came on in relief early on in that game, but did not get the start. 219 career pass attempts. Miller Moss only has 92 for comparison's sake, but very similar, as Kenny pointed out in the chat. 2 guys who stuck around the 3 years in the system, and now they're about to make their first regular season start after winning the bowl game, after replacing the Heisman winner. I think the biggest difference here, because you look at LSU's offense last year, we talked about how good they were, right? Number 2 in FEI. They come in the preseason rankings number one in FEI on offense. I am going to tell you right now, I think that is a deceptive thing more than anything.
I hate that we have basically neutralized the usefulness of FEI and SP Plus in the off season, because
it's
even more so than the past, where we'd have to sort of pump the brakes on some things when teams had massive turnover. Like the massive turnover that happens in college football now, you can't trust any of these numbers.
No,
one way or the other.
No.
What we have to rely on, I think, is sort of like historical track records.
Yes, and to LSU's credit, I think LSU has always had great receivers, and they do have a damn good receiver in Kyron Lacey, but he was the number 3 option last year. They replaced Neighbors and Brian Thomas. So LSU's offense was incredibly good last season. They had Jaden Daniels at quarterback, and I think that when you look to the running game, this is where the big difference is, because you look at the SEC rankings that CBS did per position group. LSU's got the number 1 offensive line, and I think that is a major talking point to talk about. Will Campbell, their left tackle, was quoted this week a couple of times. At one point, he said, "We know what we're going there for. It's not to go to Caesar's Palace. It's to be in a fist fight." To which Bear Alexander responded with purple devil emojis and ninja emojis. And then there was another quote from Connor Morissette of USCFootball.com in which he said, quote, "We're going to run the ball. That's what the game plan is. We're going to run the ball." Well, let's look at the numbers. Let's talk about the LSU running game last year. They were number 1 in the country in yards per carry at 6.18. Number 1. And this is going up against a USC defense that gave up 9 billion yards to Washington, a team that was supposed to be one-dimensional last year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if I told you that Jaden Daniels accounted for 42.6% of LSU's rushing yards? He had 1,134 and an 8.4 yards per carry average. Jaden Daniels is no longer on this football team. Their quarterback now is Garrett Nussmeier, who is not a running quarterback. He had 1 attempt for 1 yard all of last season. In the ReliaQuest Bowl, he was neither sacked nor ran at all. 0 yards for 0 attempts in the ReliaQuest Bowl. LSU's running backs last year averaged 5.24 yards per carry. Compare that to what SC's running backs had, 6.04. The Trojans had 3/4 of a yard more per carry from their running backs than LSU did, even though LSU as a team was number 1 in the country in yards per carry. It's because of Jaden Daniels. He was such a great, prolific runner, and he is not on this team anymore. So I think LSU's offense can be pretty damn good, and I think that it's going to be a big test for SC's defense with all of the rebuild that we've talked about all offseason that with Danton Lynn, all the transfers coming in, EMA, Keely Arnold's, Humphrey, Ramsey, all those guys. It's a big test. But this is not the LSU defense, the LSU offense that, played Alabama last year or Ole Miss last year, any of those teams in the SEC. This is a completely different offense, even though they have a really good offensive line led by Will Campbell and Emory Jones.
Yeah, and that's the main thing here, is that when you have an offensive line that has that kind of talent available to you at tackle, especially, everything you want to do on offense gets that much easier because you have those guys established on offense, on the offensive line. So in that sense, yes, this is a completely new, I suppose, philosophical offense because Jaden Daniels isn't out there doing his thing. That doesn't mean that it's going to be less effective. It will just be something different. that is very different. And we saw that in the in that bowl, in the ReliaQuest Bowl, where Garrett Nussmeier has 45 pass attempts, and LSU only runs the ball 25 times, and it's a very the offense is very attacking through the air and relying a hell of a lot less on finding those yards on the ground because they can't sort of create them with Jaden Daniels.
Mm-hmm.
In that sense, the if LSU wants to come out and run the ball as they've said, and I think they're perfectly within their rights to come out and say that that's what they want to do. I think most football teams will come out and say, yeah, we want to establish the run and run the ball down the opponent's throat, and that's sort of a very basic approach to have. But if LSU wants to actually do that, we haven't seen this particular team have that kind of approach. We haven't seen Brian Kelly's offense be able to do that yet at LSU.
Yeah.
And it could be because, I mean, there's sort of twofold. They haven't needed to,
Mm-hmm.
or when they have, the presence of a running quarterback like Jaden Daniels makes it so much easier to do that because you can do read options where you freeze the defender because he's got to wait and see what's happening at the mesh point. This isn't a definitely they can't do this, but so much of this is a can they do this? Can they actually establish the run against a USC front that, yeah, gave up a hell of a lot of running yards last year, but the new defensive coordinator, Danton Lynn, I mean, we're going to talk about this later in Over Under. His UCLA front was, you couldn't run against them. USC couldn't run against them. Nobody who faced them was able to run against them. And from a USC perspective, answering these questions on USC's side of it, UCLA was able to do that with Jay Toya plugging up the middle of the defense. USC doesn't have a Jay Toya.
Bear's gonna have to be that guy.
I mean, either Bear's gonna have to be that guy, or Kobe Pepe, or Danton Lynn is gonna have to sort of rethink the way that he sets up his front because he doesn't have the 330-pound space eater.
Right.
That just, there's no one on USC's defense that is a Jay Toya style of player, really, unless Kobe Pepe becomes that guy, which, like we've talked about previously, would love to see that happen.
Right.
So, again, the question marks exist on both sides, but I'm with you on this, that like there's this assumption that LSU and the rest of the Big Ten is going to just be able to stuff the ball down USC's throat in the run game. And certainly they would have been able to do it against USC last year because of the way the defense was. But if the defense is reimagined in Danton Lynn's image, I don't know that LSU will find it that easy actually to do.
Well, I think the hard part is, and the hard part talking about this is that, yeah, I don't think that when you say that you're going to open the season against the team who was number 1 in the country in yards per carry last year, that sounds scary. That sounds daunting. And I'm not saying that it isn't.
Yeah.
But I don't think that, I just think it's misleading for what LSU is going to do this year on offense, like we talked about. But the hard part is, we talked about Washington really quickly. Washington went into the game last November. We all thought they were going to be one-dimensional with Michael Penix because they hadn't really run the ball a lot. And they ran 300 yards on the ground over SC with, one of the greatest opponent rushing performances that SC's ever had against them, right? And when that is a possibility with this defense, because that's what it was last November, it's hard to, say that LSU can't be the number 1 rushing attack in the country if they were that last year and SC's defense was so bad last year, because A, we haven't seen SC actually get better on defense because they haven't played a game. And B, we haven't seen LSU, well, we have seen LSU regress in the run game in the ReliaQuest Bowl, but extremely small sample size. So,
and that's really
giant question.
Really, the problem is so much of talking about either of these teams is there's such a small sample size for anybody involved. Like,
right.
Even Garrett Nussmeier, has had live snaps for LSU, certainly more than Miller Moss. Like, it's still, even for him, it's too small of a sample size to know what he's going to be as a full-time starter. And then you look at Miller Moss and the sample size is even less. And You look at LSU's defensive line, and sample size is pretty small. And LSU, even they have the guys that they have up front, obviously that look like really outstanding tackles, but they're in the trenches. They have other guys who are question marks with very little sample size that are going to be in a prove it sort of mode. So there's so much about this matchup that I just don't feel confident saying that I know how it's gonna play out. I can sort of envision all possibilities with both sides of these things. Which side will have things go wrong and which side will have things go right.
Yeah, Kenny in the chat says, in honor of THT, rest in peace, Travelers Thursdays. What are each of your most annoying narratives after the game? This is one of my favorite bits that THT did, where you predict what the crazy response is going to be like on Twitter or wherever after the game that hasn't happened yet, right? And I want to get to this now and not in the mailbag, because one of the things that I think is worth talking about going into this game is the idea of Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly coaching in big games, neutral site games, those kind of things. And so to answer Kenny's question, the most annoying narrative, I think, is the idea that Lincoln Riley or Brian Kelly, whoever loses, oh, well, yeah, of course they're going to lose. They can't win big games. They've never won anything.
Think about LSU. Brian Kelly if Brian Kelly loses this game, because didn't they lose? They lost to Florida State last year.
They've
and
lost to Florida State each of the
row.
last two years in week one.
Brian Kelly will still be without a season opening win at LSU.
Yes.
And if Lincoln Riley loses this game, it will be his recent track record, certainly in his last 6, 7, 8 games against ranked teams, will be pretty darn bad. And the narrative on Lincoln Riley is already dipping down. So you're right. This will be seen as a referendum on either of these coaches and their ability to coach in big games, when you've crunched the numbers and it's not that simple.
Yeah, let's talk about Brian Kelly really quick here. We talked about the last 2 week ones he's lost to Florida State. Both of those kind of ugly games last year, especially 24-23. I think there was a missed field goal, a missed PAT. Sorry, that was 2 years ago. There's a missed PAT or something, right?
Yeah.
They lost that game 24-23 in New Orleans. Very neutral New Orleans there for LSU to play. Yeah. And then last year it was neutral in Orlando. And FSU didn't exactly jiggle bag LSU, but they 45-24.
If I remember correctly, they sort of blew the game open. At a certain point.
Yeah, and we talked about it last week in the season preview. It was the only game all season that LSU had multiple turnovers. And that's a sign of what can happen in a week one. You can be a little sloppy. Yeah. But I think it's important to say that don't get suckered into the idea that Brian Kelly sucks in week one just because LSU has lost the last 2 against Florida State. I ran the numbers at Notre Dame, 12 seasons, right? 10-2 in week one openers. Mind you, it's a little weird because there's only one ranked team that Notre Dame has played in those 12 games. That was number 14, Michigan, in 2018. There was the blowout in Ireland in 2012 against Navy. It's a weird thing. But I think it's important just to mention that week one being this massive struggle fest for Brian Kelly isn't necessarily a law. But let's talk about Lincoln Riley. I see it all the time. Lincoln Riley cannot win big games. Can't win big games. That's his flaw. He can't win big games. Season openers, Lincoln Riley 7-0. Mind you, LSU is easily the best team he's faced in those 7 games. So take that for what it's worth. One of those includes an FCS game, I think, in 2021 at OU. Now, what are big games? I've come up with a list of big games that I think. Power 5 opponents away in the regular season. I think those would be big games, right?
Yeah.
Lincoln Riley, 2-0 all time. How about ranked opponents in the regular season? Yeah, those are big games. Lincoln Riley is 7-6. 7-6, not great. The weird thing here is he started 6-0, and he's 1-6 in his last 7, including a lot of those at SC, which again, I understand why you would raise the red flag, because in all the big games at the end of this list that I mentioned, he was 1-4 last year in quote big games, which is going to tank some of this record. But he was 4-1 in the Red River Shootout. Sorry, 1-1 in the SC Notre Dame rivalry, only 2 games. 2 bowl wins, 4 losses in bowls or playoff games, 2-4. 4-1 in conference championship games. You put it all together, there's 33 big games that Lincoln Riley has coached. He's 20-13. At SC
Perfectly
alone, there's
respectable.
10, and he's 3-7. 3-7 in that list, all of that with Caleb Williams. Well, I guess all but the Holiday Bowl with Caleb Williams. So 2-7 with Caleb Williams is alarming, and absolutely needs to be. Those are questions to talk about when SC was 1-4 in big games last year. Absolutely. But last year is such an outlier.
Well,
Lincoln Riley was 19-9 in big games before last season. And I think it's important to say that, like, 20-13, if that's bad, compare it to James Franklin, who's like 3-18 or whatever it is against ranked teams on the road. You know, like the idea that like Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly are bad coaches is so weird to me, because these are accomplished guys. Have they won national championships? No. But there's like 2 dudes
there are only
college football who have.
2 active head coaches in college football who have won a national title. My big thing with this is, to me, the trend on Lincoln Riley speaks to teams, and not like, this isn't a situation where, you know, all things are equal and his teams are sort of at the same level, and you win some, you lose some. It seems to me that Lincoln Riley has teams that win all of the big games, or none of them. And I'm not, obviously you want a coach who's winning every big game no matter what, but it seems like there have just sort of been weak points in his Kenny giving the nerd. Well, actually, Mac Brown is an active head coach with the national title too. Okay, fair. But yeah, with Lincoln Riley, it would seem to me that in sort of the in-season games, it very much comes down to teams that were or weren't, and that speaks quite heavily to 2023, which was clearly a team that was so bad on defense that there was no hope of winning games, that if they had a defense with even slightly a pulse, they could have easily won those games with Caleb Williams, because quite frankly, in many of those games, Caleb Williams did more than enough to win the game, and his defense didn't allow him to win the game. The big question mark for Lincoln Riley continues to be the
defense, and
the defense, but also, you know, the performance in like playoff games. But then again, I look at the playoff games and it's like, okay, so you got jiggle bagged by LSU,
the greatest offense in the history of college football.
Is the greatest offense in the history of college football. Put up 63 points on you. The Alabama in the Orange Bowl, where, you know, put up a fight, but again, it's 2018
a really
Alabama.
bad first quarter.
And then 28 and then the Georgia in a double overtime game that anybody could have won. To me, there are respectable losses there from the Lincoln Riley perspective. So yeah, I think it's drawing some painting with a broad brush to say that Lincoln Riley can't win these games because he's won them too often to say that he can't. Like, James Franklin can't win these games, and there are reasons why James Franklin can't win these games either. And you could have a discussion
we've talked before about how that stat is a little
it's not fair. It's not super fair to James Franklin, but it is, the stat is what it is. And you know, the stats sometimes with Lincoln Riley are not fair to Lincoln Riley, but the stats are what they are and they reflect what they reflect. But the point being is that, like, the stats aren't that they don't actually reflect that poorly on Lincoln Riley. And you and I were talking before we started recording. The thing about this game is people will try to make this a narrative about the head coaches and their ability to win these big games. But when you actually dig deep into it, whoever wins this game or loses this game will just have that win or loss added to what are overall pretty respectable records in these kinds of games. And obviously you want to win it, and obviously we will draw our conclusions about what happens in this game, but like in the end, this game will be a drop in the bucket for either one of these coaches, and not necessarily proof or
it's not going to be, this one game is not going to be the referendum on Brian Kelly and Lincoln Riley. So,
or it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be. And so if that will be the annoying narrative, because no matter what happens, all the talk on Tuesday, especially if you listen to Paul Feinbaum, is going to be how, Lincoln Riley or Brian Kelly needs to be fired because of what happened on Sunday, which is ridiculous. But alas, any other SC LSU thoughts before we get to over under?
LSU's offense is going to be fascinating to see. They've got some nice skill talent that I think if USC isn't improved, the skill talent will do some damage to USC between Mason Taylor and Kyron Lacey. Garrett Nussmeier is somebody that is fascinating to me too, because again, if USC's defense hasn't improved in the secondary, he is capable of tearing apart a secondary. So this will be a major test on USC's defense. And again, we don't want to call like referendums on any of this, but this will be a pretty interesting proving ground for what USC's defense is trying to put out there. Aside from the sort of run discussion that we had, I think everybody looks at USC's defense and sees the strength being in the secondary.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they need to be a strength in this matchup because, quite frankly, if I'm LSU, I talk about wanting to run the ball, but I low key want to see my quarterback go 31 of 45 for 395 yards and 3 touchdowns, which is what he did in the ReliaQuest Bowl.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely a world this ends up being a shootout, right? Because we know that both offenses are capable of that. These are both quarterbacks who are not as fleet of foot as the Heisman winners who are they're replacing. I'm not going to say that they're stone foot quarterbacks. I don't think Miller Moss is a stone foot quarterback, but he's not Caleb Williams.
Not Caleb Williams. Yeah.
So
and neither Garrett Nussmeier or Miller Moss is Jane Daniels, who is even less stone.
Which I've seen knows plenty about Jane Daniels being able to run. So all right, let's take a quick break and come back to talk about over under.
So you're going over.
I'm feeling bold. Give me that over.
I'll go under. I got to take an under here. I got 3 unders to take.
I'm going to do an under here.
All right. The first over under of the season. Super excited for this. If you're joining us on YouTube, we'll throw the link in the chat, and you can play along as well. Make your picks. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, we'll make sure that the link is there in the podcast description. Same thing with Spotify as well. So, all right, let's get into the first one. Alicia, what is your very first over under? What do you got?
I got 119.5 LSU rushing yards. We had that whole discussion about the LSU rushing attack, how last year they ranked extremely highly in rushing statistics, but about more or less 50% of all of their rushing gains were because of Jaden Daniels. They averaged 204.5 rushing yards per game in 2023, and Jaden Daniels accounted for 94.5 of those per game. By contrast, USC allowed 186.46 rushing yards per game last year. That ranked 119th nationally, and quite frankly, was lower than I expected the average to be.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, Danton Lynn's UCLA allowed 80.8 rushing yards per game, which was second nationally. Interestingly, LSU had only 97 rushing yards against Wisconsin when they played their one game without Jane Daniels in the ReliaQuest Bowl. So will LSU be able to run to the degree that their offensive linemen are talking about being able to run? I was tempted to put this over under at 99.5 simply because
Yeah.
growing up in the Pete Carroll era, I judged whether or not USC had done a good job on run defense about whether or not they'd held the opposing team under 100 yards rushing. And I was like, yeah, let's just do that again. And then I thought about it. And I was like, that's not fair. That's
Well,
not fair to this defense.
I always think of SC had a long streak in which they didn't allow a 100-yard rusher.
Yes.
And for the longest time, it was Echimandu from Cal, who was like the guy who had previously done it. It was Echimandu from Cal, which is always like hearing Pete Arbogast talk about. But 119 is very tough. 99, if you would have said 99, this would have been an easy over. 119, if you'd have, but before I looked up and did all the research about like how drastic the numbers were with Jaden Daniels and how much of their running prowess was because of him, I would have taken the over easily here again. But a little apprehension because he's gone. Even still, I'm taking the over. I think that they can end up with a they can end up in a position to be able to have success on the ground without having a billion yards because of their natural regression and SC being able to get better from last year and still get this over slightly, like 130 maybe. Which by the way, if you would have been told a week ago SC's going to hold LSU to 100 to $130 on the ground, you take it, wouldn't you?
Oh yeah. Yes, I would absolutely take it.
Yeah.
I low key, and again, I told you before we started recording, like it's annoying how bullish I've gotten over the past week. Low key, I think Danton Lynn has something up his sleeves.
All right. What does that mean?
Well, you've given me the under, and I'm cool with that.
Okay. Sounds good. We will get to the next one. My first over under 116.5. 116.5 total plays combined. You're probably saying, who cares about the number of total plays? Well, I was listening to the McCready and Siskey podcast. They do a bunch of clips on TikTok that I watch, and it's really entertaining. I need to like listen to their full shows. But they talked about the play clock and the 40-second play clock in week 0 and how they got to fix it because the number of times that it was being started like in a delayed way was alarming and was a big part of why there were only 7 drives in that Florida State Georgia Tech game. And I think Siskey talked about how there was like every time it would be like 4 to 5 seconds before they would start the 40-second clock. And if you add that up over like a 13 play drive, that's like you're looking at like a full minute, right? Like, and over 7 drives, that's 7 minutes, right? Like all this stuff sort of adds up. So I looked up the numbers in week 0, the per play per team average. Sorry, plays. I even writing this down, I couldn't get this right. Number of plays per game per team. Does that make sense? Was down to 60.8. Each team ran 60.8 plays per game in week 0. That was down 9.1% from what teams were averaging throughout all of last season at 66.9 plays per game per team. So last year, LSU and SC averaged 64.7 and 63.3 respectively plays per game. You add those together, it's 128. You take off 9.1%, it's 116.5. So the line is 116.5 number of total combined plays. And I think your eyes are like glazing over.
They glazed over the moment you started getting into percentages of numbers, and yeah, numbers aren't my thing. Well, stats, whatever. Math isn't my thing, and you started mathing me, so yeah, my eyes glaze over. I'm taking the over here because my eyes glazed over. I get what you're saying, and I get what was being discussed on that podcast. I also think that week 0 games potentially had an opportunity to highlight this with
Sure.
reffing crews, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was a point of emphasis that they were discussing with those crews going into week 1. I also just think that the odds are in the favor of LSU and USC having more plays than some of the teams that we saw playing. Like, I think Florida State and Georgia Tech stylistically were always going to be leaning towards a lower play count.
Sure.
And I think LSU and USC just stylistically are going to always be leaning towards a higher play count. So I feel pretty good about taking the over here.
All right, that locks me into the under. Let's go to your second over under. What do you got?
All right, I'm doing 49.5 Woody Marks rushing yards. Now, this was based around the debuts of USC's last 3 transfer running backs who were USC's primary starters. We're talking Keontae Ingram, and then Travis Dye, and then Marshawn Lloyd. I would say all 3 were pretty good success stories at USC, but their debuts were kind of mixed. Keontae Ingram had 86 yards against San Jose State in 2021. Travis Dye had 20 against Rice. Marshawn Lloyd had 42 against San Jose State in 2023. The average of that is 49.3. So I made it 49.5. Now, we get into some interesting things about Woody Marks at Mississippi State. He's played 45 games in his career. In 16 of those games, he had 49.5 or more yards rushing. Against LSU, he's played LSU 4 times in his career. In his first showing, he only had 15 yards. But then in 2021, he had 46 yards. And in 2022, he had 50 yards. And in 2023, he had 75 yards. So he is steadily increasing his yardage totals every time he plays LSU. Does that mean he's going to get up there above 50 yards against an LSU defensive front that we think, could be interesting, at least, for the new defensive coordinator and still some talent up front against an offensive line on USC's side that we're, a little bit wait and see with. So over or under?
I'm taking the under. The over on 49.5 Woody Marks rushing yards, because Alicia, I don't know if you've ever noticed, Woody Marks has never played a football game. There are no statistics. This is fake news that you just put out. I think you're using Joquavius Marks' stats, but Woody Marks has never played a football game. Never. He's never done it. So
Joquavius Woody Marks.
Yeah, you cannot use Joquavius's numbers from Mississippi State, because totally different dude. Yeah. Woody Marks, give me the over. I think that I see why you used Ingram, Dye, and Lloyd's numbers, but those games are against San Jose State, Rice, and San Jose State.
Yeah.
So, I think that
games USC would have been more likely to run the ball effectively and without issue.
But I think those are games more likely that you want to rotate in week 1 all of your running backs.
This is true.
I think against LSU, you want to go with running back number 1 a lot. And if this was the line for Utah State, I'd take the under. But this isn't Utah State, it's LSU. So I'd take the over.
All
right. Let's go to your last over under. What do you got?
Are we going to your over under?
Yeah, see, it's week 1.
It's
week 1. We're
rusty.
forgetting everything. Jeez. All right, 7.5 catches, over under 7.5 catches for LSU tight end Mason Taylor. I think he's the man to watch on this LSU offense. We didn't talk about him earlier, but we probably should have. 6'5", 255 pounds, out of St. Thomas Aquinas High School in Florida. Easily, one of the top handful of schools in the country, up there with, Mater Dei and Bosco and IMG and all that. St. Thomas Aquinas is. And 2 seasons. True freshman, he had 38 catches. True sophomore, he had 36 catches last year for the Tigers. He's the top returning pass catcher from LSU's team last year But the reason I have this line at 7.5 is because he had career highs, 7 catches for 88 yards against Wisconsin in the ReliaQuest Bowl. I think in a week 1 matchup, I think your new quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier, is going to want to establish a rapport with the tight end, the safety blanket. And, Taylor having a big game in the ReliaQuest Bowl, Nussmeier's first career start, makes a lot of sense. I think the same thing can happen in week 1, potentially. So over under 7.5.
I am taking the under on this one because I am an eternal optimist, and eventually, USC's defense will find a way to not get murdered by an opposing tight end.
I actually think this is a case of optimistic, Alicia.
I am an eternal optimist when it comes to this. I'm playing the odds here. I think LSU has some nice pass catchers that they'll probably want to get the ball out to. I think the bowl game situation is a different scenario than a full off season with Garrett Nussmeier throwing to the same receiving core. So yeah, I think the safety blanket will be there, but maybe not to the tune of 8 catches.
All right, that locks me into the over. Dalton Kincaid 3.0, whatever it is. Lock it in. In. All right, let's get to your last over under. What do you got?
All right, I'm going Zachariah Branch receiving yards, 68.5 receiving yards. His career high receiving yards was against Arizona State in 2023. He had 68. And the whole talk of the offseason has been, can Zachariah Branch become a bigger receiving threat for USC? We know how good of a special teams player he is. We know that he's a dangerous sort of utility man. But when it comes down to it, USC needs him to be a pure receiving target that does damage through the air. We've played enough college football 25 to know that,
really good, 97 speed.
Can
baby.
USC figure out how to get him over the top to take the top off a defense? Because I would love to see that. He could get all of these yards in one catch if USC played the way that I play on college football 25. And the thing about LSU is that they have been DBU. They have been known for having really, really great defensive backs that they've produced over the years, but they aren't necessarily that team coming into this year, at least not in perception wise. Brad Crawford, we referenced this earlier, had sort of the rankings of SEC units, and they were 13th out of 16 when he did that ranking in July, and when he more recently did a ranking of the top SEC secondaries, they weren't in the top 10. So this might be a matchup where Zachariah Branch has the ability to get one over on a LSU secondary that really, really struggled last year, that will need to rebuild its confidence. And the best thing that USC could do is to smash that confidence on play 1 over the top.
Yeah, we'll see about the go route against press coverage, which is so money and college football 25. I'm going to take the under on this, which locks you into the over. Not because I'm doubting Zachariah Branch, more so because on a technicality, if you would have said yards
All
from
purpose?
scrimmage,
Yeah.
I'm taking it. I think it'll be interesting to see how Branch is used either as a running back or maybe on screens that go backwards, those kind of things. I think that he's going to be used a fair bit in the offensive scheme. And I think that in a week 1 scenario, look at last season, how week 1, there were all those option pitches to Zachariah Branch and screen passes, right? Things that we didn't really see as the season progressed.
Jet sweeps count as receiving yards, don't they?
Depends on how you give them. If it's a little flip, it's receiving yards.
Okay, that's what I need.
If it's a handoff backwards, it's rushing. So yeah, basically I'm saying that I think he's going to get yards so many different ways. It doesn't have to be technically receiving yards. So give me the under. Let's go to the last over under. It's mine. I'm going to say over under 3.5. 3.5 Zachariah Branch punt return yards. You're probably thinking that's a weird ass line, Michael. It is. You know why? Because LSU allowed -1 punt return yards last season. -1. Surprisingly, not the best in the country. That was, I think, was it Kansas? I can't remember. I looked it up. I can't remember what it was. But they only had 2 returns. 2 returns against. Ole Miss had one for 3 yards. Texas A&M had one for -4. So can Branch outdo the entire list of punt returners against LSU last year with a 3.5-yard punt return against LSU? Of course, we know that Zachariah Branch led all of FBS with a 22.1 punt returns per yards per punt return clip last year. Even though LSU only allowed 2, can he get there?
So, see, the problem here is basically this is a question of whether or not LSU will give Zachariah Branch the chance to return a punt.
Yes.
Because if I was them, I wouldn't kick anywhere near him. But teams are eternally optimistic on when it comes to punting to opposing players. Certainly early in the season, I think they're more likely to be optimistic about their special teams coverage. So I'm going with the over here. I think he just needs to have 1 where he takes it 5 yards, or 2 where he takes both 2.5, and goes from there. So I'm gonna take my chances here and go with the over.
All right. We'll see how that goes. That locks you in to the over and me into the under. That is over under. That is all of over under today. Let's get to our predictions, Alicia. A lot of predictions to get to. Score predictions. The Vegas line is 4.5 in favor of the LSU Tigers as of Wednesday, us recording this.
And that's gone down.
Has it since?
No. I mean from where it opened. I think it opened
like
around
6.5.
7. Yeah,
something like that. The SP Plus projections has LSU winning by 10, 41-31. Actually, it's like 9 point something, but 41-31 with a 72% win probability for the Tigers. But of course, we factor in that transfers are not really factored in SP Plus, so take that for what it's worth. Alicia, what's your score prediction?
in my season predictions, I had LSU as a loss for USC.
You did.
And I knew when I picked that there was a very, very, very good chance that within the 7 days that were to follow, I would convince myself of the opposite. And that is exactly what I have done. Shocking, I know.
Are you being a flipper flopper?
I'm a flipper flopper. I've got USC 37, LSU 33. I think this game will be very cagey in the early going. I think both defenses will actually have a pretty decent showing in the first half. And then in the second half, things will open up. And when it comes down to it, I trust Lincoln Riley's offense more than I trust Brian Kelly's offense.
The only thing I'm hearing you talk about is one of the great quotes from Seinfeld.
I have a fear of commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was George Costanza chiming in. All right, so you have SC winning sort of in a little shootout there.
Yeah.
I predicted SC to win in our season predictions episode, and I'm sticking with it. I will stick with it. SC wins 31-27. I think it'll be lower scoring than yours. It's not that I don't think a shootout could happen. I think a shootout absolutely is probably the odds-on best case scenario. Like, not best case scenario, but like likely scenario, right? Compared to what happened last year. Both these teams, we talked about it before. Great offenses, bad defenses, blah, blah, blah. But it's week 1. I think there's going to be some ugliness all around, and I think that contributes to keeping the scores lower than maybe the averages were last year. So 31-27. SC holds LSU to a few field goals, and that ends up being the difference, 31-27. All right. Let us know what your thoughts, your predictions are in the comments over on YouTube. Send us your emails, all that stuff. But we got a bunch of mailbag stuff to get to. So there's more coming your way here on this episode.
You've got mail.
All right, Alicia, let's get to the mailbag. Let's start with a big thank you. A big thank you to Steven, who gave us a super chat last week
Hey.
after we ended the show. Came through in the comments on YouTube. So thank you. We appreciate you. We love our support from the Rotbots. So we appreciate you, Steven. Let's get to another message we got during last week's episode. I don't remember who said this. I'm sorry if you said this, and I'm not crediting you. I'm sorry. I love you. Probably, maybe. I don't know who it was, but whoever said this. How do you guys do in your predictions last year? I pulled it up.
We could have ignored this question, Michael. We could have swept it under the rug.
We could have, but I am a man of honor, and I hope you are too, a woman of honor, whatever. You went 11-1 in your season predictions. You had SC going 11-1 with a loss to your alma mater, Notre Dame. I had SC going 10-2 with losses at Notre Dame and at home to Washington. All those predictions on the loss side were correct.
We were correct.
SC did lose to Notre Dame and did lose to Washington. The wins, though, not so much. SC went 7-5 in the regular season.
Yeah. That's part of why.
Is that why you're being a flipper flopper?
No, but that I just as I've said, I've never seen a USC schedule that I couldn't make 10-2 or better.
I actually think this is a case of optimistic Alicia.
Always.
Yeah.
Is it August? Then optimistic Alicia is in town.
Yeah. There you go. Says the person who picked LSU last week. Unbelievable. Greg on YouTube said, this season is the biggest test for the head coach. He came here in part because of the idea that he could recruit better at SC than Oklahoma. Right now, according to 24/7, SC's roster is ranked number 15th in talent. Last year, it was number 8. This is by far the least talented team on paper that SC has fielded since I can remember, or since 24/7 started the roster rankings. He shouldn't have a roster in year 3 that is ranked number 15. It should be a top 5, and that's what happens when you have a staff that didn't have elite recruiters and elite developers. It's on him to make sure he has it right this time and that the season goes better than last year, or else he's on a scorching hot seat entering next year.
I think that Washington should be a very good example of how team talent should not and is not the end all be all of being able to compete on the national level. This team may be ranked 15th in year 3, but it's also hard to evaluate team talent rankings when so many players are transfers who, are figuring out team talent from transfers gets really, really, really dicey. I 100% agree that USC should be in a better position in year 3, certainly across the board, in terms of some of the recruiting that's happened, particularly in the trenches, and that is something that Lincoln Riley certainly has to turn around. But I sort of have the way I see it is I've had enough of elite recruiters at USC. I've had enough of the Dante Williams of the world, to be quite honest. I just want to see USC recruit guys that fit the schemes, fit the systems, and then go out and win with them. Whether they're 5 stars or whatever, can you win with them is my big question, because USC has had a lot of 5 stars that they couldn't win with. So it is a prove it year, but it's a prove it year for me, less about the recruiting and all that kind of stuff and more about the talent that you have on your roster, which is certainly sufficient enough talent to win a lot of games. And the talent last year, in my opinion, should have been sufficient enough to win more games than they did. Can you get that talent over the top? That's my real question. So hopefully theoretically USC's defensive staff is full of what we hope to be developers. And we will see if that's the case.
I I am a full believer in the blue chip ratio thing that Bud Elliott put out years and years ago, and a full believer in the talent composite that 24/7 Sports has. I also want to say right now that I think there is a fatal flaw in it. And the fatal flaw is that when you look at SC's team, and maybe this isn't a fatal flaw, but this is just something to be mindful of. And this applies to everybody.
Mhm.
So, like, this isn't just hurting SC exponentially. This applies to everybody. And so, SC being ranked 15th is certainly like a problem. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be 15th.
Yeah.
But you look at the transfers that SC has had out. There's a lot of guys that are highly ranked dudes that didn't meet the thing, didn't meet the expectations. Damani Jackson, 5-star corner, who did not play well at SC. He just didn't. SC did not develop him.
Would you rather have Malachi Nelson or Miller Moss or Jaden Mayava right now? Because Malachi Nelson would be the highest talent rating of any of those guys. Would you rather have Tackett Curtis or Easton Mascarenas Arnold?
Well,
I would rather have Easton Mascarenas Arnold.
Tackett Curtis was ranked way ahead. I'm looking at the thing right now from 24/7. Easton Mascarenas Arnold listed in that thing as just being a 3-star. Like, it doesn't change. Like the talent is when they got on campus.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's not that I don't think that SC is talented, or I think that SC is more talented than it. It's not the argument I'm trying to make here. What I'm saying is SC has essentially swapped out a lot of the high-ranking players that they could not develop, and they swapped them for guys who were 3-star guys who were developed at other schools,
who were productive starters at other schools.
Yes, who had 4 and 5-star type production, 4-star production, probably a little more fair there, who have exceeded their expectations, right? And so Easton Mascarenas Arnold, we can all talk about as like a very good transfer that SC went out and got. He's listed as a 3-star in that talent composite. DeCarlos Nicholson, another guy. Grady Vance, another guy. Jaden Mayava, another guy. Like Jamil Muhammad, another. Like, these are all 3-star dudes who are either going to be starting or expected to be like key contributors to SC's team this year. And they only count as 3-stars in that talent composite. And so to me, the problem isn't that SC isn't talented, because they have a lot of talent. And yes, ideally, even though you lose the 5-star guys who didn't pan out and you bring in 3-star guys who were developed, ideally, you're still stockpiling with more 5-star talent, because stars do matter and they're absolutely the biggest predictor of success. So I'm not saying to the contrary. And then the other thing is, if you just develop your own guys, that goes a long way with all of this, right? Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to just look at the entire context of this. Like Eric Gentry, another guy who just listed as a 3-star in this. So I don't think that SC going down to number 15th in the thing, in that ranking, is a red flag for this particular team. Yeah. If you're going to talk about the grand picture of SC going forward and their inability to recruit at a top 5 level, yeah, I agree with you. But for this particular team, having less talent on paper from 4 years ago when Easton Mascarenas Arnold signed on the dotted line, I don't know that that's representative of what SC actually is right now. But I am a believer that the blue chip ratio thing is gospel. There's a reason why the only teams that win national championships are the ones that are ranked high on that thing, because you got to have elite coaching and the elite talent.
And by the way, the only teams that win national titles are literally Alabama, Georgia, and Clemson. Like literally, those are the only teams, and those are the top 3 teams, and not even like, Richard in the chat just says USC in 2015 was number 2 in team talent ranking. That 2015 team didn't play like it.
Right.
And like, that's again, where I come down to, does USC have sufficient talent to win 10 games this year? I believe so.
Yeah.
If they are coached well. and if the game planning is good.
Right. You got to have both things.
Yes.
You got to have both things.
Yeah.
And to Greg's
And if you
point
don't
in
have the
that comment,
coaching, then you'll have a down season, and it'll be a trend, and not just, I think USC's hope now is that last year was the one-off because of the defense. If this year isn't competitive, then that will prove that, maybe it wasn't just the defense, and then that we have bigger questions to answer. But right now, I just think I'm in a wait and see mode of what they can.
Yeah, the other thing I think is interesting is we've talked about before that SC is putting a lot of their NIL focus in transfers rather than incoming freshmen.
And Lincoln Riley is now making noise that like they're changing that philosophy.
Well, for what it's worth, that being a thing over the last 18 months, I think also helps further put SC down the list of these things because, like I said, they're trading 5-star busts for 3-star gems, and that ends up making the talent level look worse. But are they going to be better on the field? Maybe. We'll see. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they are worse on the field just because what guys were ranked 3 years ago. But again, stars matter. Don't think I'm not saying that. Don't kill me, Ryan, if you're listening to this. I'm not saying it. Let's get to some messages that we got here on the YouTube currently during this episode. Cameron in Frisco, Texas says, who do you cheer for if you're Coach O watching the game? He's probably picking
LSU.
Yeah.
He won a national title there, as a head coach.
He won it. Well, he won one at SC too.
As a head coach. He did not win a national title at USC as a head coach, Michael.
Alicia, I'm going to ask you a question. I gotta be real here.
No, you're not.
I gotta be real. Did Ed Ogeron coach that team to a national title?
Well, that's fair.
Did he?
He was a head coach.
Did he?
And he won a national title.
Gene Chizik won a national title too.
Did he coach USC to a national title?
No.
So again,
But I think it's got to be LSU. He's from Louisiana. Yeah. His blood is literally purple because that's what it is before oxygen touches it. Then it becomes red. Yeah. Tim and LA says over under on kickoffs returned or fair caught.
God, I hope that's zero. All fair catches. But realistically, no, they're going to return.
Here's the thing.
If LSU gives Zachariah Branch a chance, he's going to try.
I think fair catching is smart in general. Overall, yes. However, I think when you have Zachariah Branch, who is literally the best returner in college football, I think you roll the dice to potentially start a couple yards worse on average. You roll that dice for the chance that he breaks one for 100.
Yeah.
You have the confidence in your offense to make up the discrepancy in the averages there because the 100 yards, I think, can outweigh the 2 yards. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Kenny says, do you know if we're wearing white or cardinal? It's going to be cardinal. I think it's going to be in cardinal. LSU is going to be in white. Why do I know this? Because LSU never wears purple uniforms except for home games at LSU that is not a season opener and not against an SEC team. So non-conference home games that are not season openers are the only time LSU will ever wear purple, ever. So when they play UCLA in a few weeks, they're wearing purple, which is going to be weird. It'd be really freaking weird. But they're gonna wear white. What I think is going to be interesting is, are they wearing the white helmets? The white helmets look badass.
I imagine they'd announce that if they were.
I haven't taken the. I've been looking at Fabrizio Romano's tweets this week. I haven't been refreshing LSU's tweets, unfortunately. Ron Murray says, how much can LSU prepare for SC's defense? They have no video of SC's players in the scheme.
This is the thing, is that this was what makes the this game in particular very, very fascinating, and also makes it not necessarily an indicator of very much, because LSU has a unique challenge of they can look at Danton Lynn's film at UCLA, but they've never seen any of these players in Danton Lynn's system, let alone most of these players in USC uniforms. So now you're cobbling together tape of UCLA's defense, Oregon State's defense, Mississippi State's defense, and trying to, Wyoming's defense and wherever else guys are coming from. Like it gets really complicated and weird. So yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
And we don't even know what kind of front Danton Lynn is going to do, because again, he doesn't have Jay Toya. So how will he change things up? We don't know.
Yeah. Wasn't there a point where, am I remembering right, that like we were looking at their front last year for the preview, and it was almost like a 5-2 at one point.
Yeah.
Or like a 2-5. Because of the outside linebackers and whatnot. Like it, who knows what it's going to look like? It's going to be multiple, more than likely, because that's just what defenses are. Well, I don't know exactly what they're going to say. They probably watched a lot of UCLA film, but who's Leatu Latu? Who are the Murphy twins? I don't know. Let's go to an email we got from Tony in Denora, PA. He says, Michael and Alicia, this is Tony from Denora, PA. We had our annual SC cookout celebrating the start of a new season. I sent you guys a picture of my first plate of the afternoon. And as you can see, there is no food touching each other. The season is upon us, and I'm looking forward to both of your analysis of this first game of the season. Fight on, Tony. I put the picture up on YouTube. Here's what we're working with.
See, now he says my first plate. That's your first 2 plates, bud. That's 2 plates.
He said no food is touching, and I respect
no food is touching, but that's not his first plate. That's 2 plates.
Well,
because otherwise something would have to be touching, because that corn on the cob couldn't fit on that plate.
Because he has respect for food. Food should not intermingle.
No, food is great when it touches.
No, it's not.
Yep.
Food is not humans. Food should not touch. Look at that. Look at look at the beans.
I would
not
rather
touching the meat.
I would rather my food rub shoulders than have to rub shoulders in a crowd of other humans. So,
I mean, sure, but you could have put the corn cob right there in the middle and planted it on top of the beans.
What I like about the corn cob on its separate plate is that I like rolling my corn cob in, some butter, some mayo, and then some Parmesan cheese.
I was really worried there for a second.
What?
I thought you were going to say like in the beans or something.
Oh, no. But like the corn on the cob, like you want extra Parmesan to keep sort of re-upping the coating around the corn on the cob.
I'm sad because I have a little weird admission on the pod. I have a permanent bottom retainer in my mouth, thanks to Dr. Allman, my orthodontist, and I can't eat corn on the cob. He told me I can't eat corn on the cob. That was like 20 years ago, and me being the goody two shoes law abider that I am, I'm like, okay, I'm never gonna eat corn on the cob again.
You're supposed to get that retainer.
I am getting it off. I'm
off. So why not
soon.
Just go to town?
Soon. Soon, but not yet. What's next is Mike says, can't believe Michael is a food segregationist. In food, that's it. In food, it's not in anything else. Don't get it twisted. But food, keep the worlds apart. All right. Until then, we'll be back Sunday night about 8:00 with the CarCast, first CarCast of the year, talking SC and LSU live on YouTube right after the game, giving you our thoughts, immediate thoughts about the game. Until then, we will see ya. Be sure to make your picks for over under. Again, the link is in the YouTube chat. Also going to put it in the description as well for everybody on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube also. All those things. So until then, we will see ya.
See ya.
See ya.